Okay, we're going to cut in this little excerpt of the final case study for the Charles Daly High Power and talk about one more thing. One of the things that we experienced with the Charles Daly, and this is not the Charles Daly, but one of the things that we did experience that also required correction and some fitting was the pistol did not pass one of the tests that we have that comes with your SFS kits, which guides you to allow the slide to go forward of its own accord, like that, and look for any instances of the hammer following the slide. We recommend doing that 25 times. We're going to make a new recommendation to do it 50 times. You're not going to damage your high power by doing that, by the way. However, with your Type 1 sear lever models especially, looking for that any instance of the hammer following the slide, the hammer does not stay cocked, you really do need to make one modification to those pistols. One strategy is to use a Type 2 sear spring. That's your flat metal spring here inside the grip frame. There's two of those with the SFS kits. And one strategy is to use the stronger sear spring if you have hammer follow. But there's one other modification we made to the Charles Daly. I recommend it on all Type 1 sear lever models where there's ever an instance of hammer follow if one cannot pass that test. And that is this. You're going to be looking for the height of the sear engagement pad and a straight edge across the frame rails on the right side of the frame, and you're going to measure this distance, if we can see it here. You'll see kind of the daylight, hopefully, between the bottom of the pin punch and the top of the sear. What you will do, or what we did, was we used a typical feeler gauge you'd use for your spark plugs. 20 thousandths is a half millimeter. The guidance that we received from Leon Hubert, the designer of the SFS system, also the designer of the Type 2 sear lever, which really plays into this even more so, ultimately, his guidance was to get a margin of at least a half a millimeter, which would be 20 thousandths, and that is between the top of the engagement surface and the bottom of, I don't have three hands right now, so at the bottom of that pin punch where it goes across the top of the sear engagement pad, his guidance was at least a half millimeter, and he said better would be 1 millimeter, but I want to tell you, typically on most high powers, 1 millimeter is kind of a fantasy. You're going to be taking the entire engagement pad off. But there was a point I think he made there when he said, better is 1 millimeter. Having this engagement pad as far from that sear lever coming forward that is floating, that is contacting the sear, the farther away, the better, in his opinion, because there is no right answer for this, and there can't be an exact right answer. But what we're dealing with is a sear lever that is floating, is not positively positioned. That's what we were dealing with there in the Charles Daly. We wound up taking off some of this engagement pad, and we had about 75, about 30 thousandths, and you're talking about 0.75 millimeters was the clearance or the margin that we wound up with in this area that we were just showing you, and that stopped all level of hammer follow. This is one of our Type 1 sear lever models. You can see that it has been filed. That's just a typical little grinding tool on a Dremel, and it can do a nice job of lowering that engagement pad. This one is just a little better than a half millimeter, just a little more than 20 thousandths clearance there, and the trigger pull, it seems very good. You've got take up that would be kind of like a Type 2 sear lever model, and it's fine. The trigger brake is clean. We do get just a little bit of rearward movement of the trigger after the slide starts rearward. That would be a little bit of necessary over travel for the Type 1 sear lever model, and about halfway in the return of the trigger, we do get a reset. So that's how we've modified this one. The trigger pull and the action and the reaction of it is very, very good, and it gives us a little bit more margin. Now, is this a necessary thing on all Type 1 steer lever high powers? Again, there's no right answer here. One of the things that was corrected in the Type 2 steer lever models, which is one we have here, you notice is very, very different than our slides. I'll show you one here. This steer lever is floating. There's no spring underneath it. It's not positively positioned, so it floats like that. Yes, it contacts the steer when it goes forward. Here's our engagement point for our Type 2 steer lever. You see it's actually recessed here below the level of the slide rail, and there's a spring underneath it. So after it's depressed and it starts its rearward travel, it's going to return back to its position here, and it cannot contact that steer coming forward. So not only was this an improvement as far as drop safety, positively positioning this steer lever had all kinds of advantages for safety, for the design in general. We're going to be getting a lot deeper into this, and what is this Type 1 steer lever? Where did it come from? What did it descend from? We do know that over the years, I can show you one here. This is an unmodified serial number 7459 FN internal extractor model, original sear, and we see almost no clearance. There actually is daylight, and I mean it's just barely any daylight underneath that point. Here is a unmodified out of the box practical from 1993, and we see definitive daylight underneath this sear. So we believe, and we've seen that this was a subject for the high powers when the Type 1 steer levers were in use. Over the years, we saw them getting this height of this engagement surface lower as the years went on. It seemed to be something that they were conscious about. But where we're going with this is if you do modify a Type 1 steer lever model with the SFS system, this is you want to make sure you do all of the tests, exceed even the testing protocol, make sure that there is no instances of any kind of hammer following the slide, and that floating Type 1 steer lever cannot manipulate the steer on the slide's return forward.